Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Back in the 1960s, Professor John Kemeny and Thomas Kurtz really started what became a larger revolution at Dartmouth, where they sort of set down the principle that computers ought to be openly available to everybody on campus, right? And out of that came, first of all, they created the basic language that anybody could learn how to program. But broader than that, they really started a larger movement to make computing resources available to everybody. And they were pioneers in time sharing, inventing a lot of the sort of basics of time sharing as part of how they could actually make, at that time was very limited resources available very broadly. And I was fortunate in my time at Dartmouth to sort of see that, roll out even further. My freshman fall was the first year that Macintoshes were required for all incoming students. So I got to see that roll out. In the 90s, late 90s, they sort of expanded that. Actually, early 90s, they finally saw the light and switched over to PCs. But in the late 90s and early part of this decade, they really sort of took that to the next step. And in understanding that wireless networking was a big important thing that made computing even more broadly available on campus. And in fact, just when I was there this past August, I got to see firsthand how amazing a job they've done of rolling it out. And sort of this, I was talking to Larry Levine, the CIO, and they really sort of spoke to their commitment to have the entire campus available wirelessly. He said, I pressed him on this, how much of it do you really have wired? And he said, well, there may be a couple dead zones in the cemetery, but beyond that, our commitment is, if you find a place where there's a dead zone, and we'll come running out with an access point wired. So they got about 600 access points wired up right now. And the folks that are here today from Dartmouth are really talking about where they're going from there, and how they're looking at this new exciting project around a digital dorm to think about, how can we even more embed useful computing technology, into student life. So with that, I'd like to introduce, we actually have 4 people who are going to speak this morning. Starting as David Kotz is a professor of computer science in the computer science department, which is right across the street from where the new dorms are going to be. We have Thomas Luxon, a professor of English, Denise Anthony, professor of sociology, and we have Dean of Residential Life, Martin Redmond, who's also going to be with us this morning. So with that, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That's a very nice introduction. We have been working with computing for quite a long time at Dartmouth and enjoying every minute of it and looking forward to what we can do next. As Kevin mentioned, there are actually 4 of us sort of tag teaming here today. It's a very informal presentation. We're essentially at the brainstorming stage of this project, starting to think about what we can do with technology in the dormitory residential life experience at Dartmouth. And I'll introduce these speakers as we come by. One of the things that got us started thinking about this program, this idea, was an opportunity that's facing us in the very near term. Dartmouth is about to embark on building several new residential facilities, 3 in the very near term, and then probably many more after that. The first 3 that will be built will add about 500 beds. Will create about 500 beds for our residential environment. But the thing that really struck me was that one of these facilities was right across the street from the computer science building where I sit. And so I thought this would be a really neat opportunity not only to enhance the residential experience, but also to create a test bed for those of us interested in wireless networks and pervasive computing and so forth, to try out new ideas in the field and see how students actually respond to work with, play with, interact with these technologies. And you'll hear some of the others of us talk about that, their perspectives on that idea. The other thing that I think is critical part of this project as we start to develop it is corporate involvement. I mean, clearly there's a lot of companies like Microsoft that are aggressively pushing the edge in technology and are obviously this week or you can tell Microsoft is very interested in the home type environment, and the dorm is kind of like a home, kind of like a workplace, kind of like a social space, all wrapped up in one. Kevin gave us a fairly good introduction to Dartmouth. We've been around for a long time, at least by U.S. standards, certainly not by European standards. Over 200 years, we're in the Ivy League. We're known as Dartmouth College, but in essence, we're a university. We have professional programs in business, medicine, and engineering, and in the graduate programs in the arts and sciences as well. We have about 4,000 undergraduates and about 1,000 graduate students. So it's a fairly compact place, fairly compact campus. It's very digital, if you will. We've been requiring every student to own a computer for at least 10 years. And today, they essentially all own laptops, wireless laptops. Once we put in the wireless network, they started choosing laptops overwhelmingly. 70% one year, 88% the next year, 98% last year. So this year, we didn't even offer desktops. They're all switching to wireless laptops. And as Kevin mentioned, we've been doing computing for a long time, initially with time sharing and BASIC, and one of the first campus to roll out a wired campus, an extensive email client that is extremely easy to use, brought email to the masses long before most people knew what email was. What Kevin didn't mention was that he was one of the co-authors of Blitzmail, which is still the most popular client on campus. And more recently, the addition of the wireless network. And this year, the transfer of our telephone network to voice over IP. This summer, all the faculty and staff telephones were replaced in over a week and are all now Cisco voice over IP telephones. And the dorms will be switched over in the next year or two. And the goal is convergence. Telephony now, cable TV in another couple of years, all that over the IP backbone. So we're constantly pushing the edge. We've also been ramping up our involvement with industry in various projects related to this space. Cisco helped to fund a study that I've worked on to measure how much people use the wireless network on campus, which we've been doing ever since they switched on the first access point. And it's given us a huge treasure trove of information about how people actually use this technology in a real environment. Last year, we hosted a conference we called the Unleashed Conference that brought together industry and academic leaders from around the country to look at this issue of wireless campuses. We've been working with Docomo Labs on mobility prediction to enhance location-aware applications or to enhance network applications that can benefit from predicting your next location. We also have an extensive security project working with public key infrastructures. In this context, they're applying it to the wireless network to make it easier to authenticate guests that are coming to campus. Of course, today our network is completely unsecured, or as some say, you have to be in Hanover, New Hampshire to be able to use it, and that's a pretty strong first line of defense. But once you get there, it's open. We would like to tighten that up a little bit, but still have that open sense that academia often likes to have. This summer, we did a joint study with McKinsey & Company in which we actually attached pagers to people and paged them periodically to gather information from more of a sociological perspective of how they were using the network and when and where, who they were with, and Denise can tell you more about that. And then we're just now beginning to roll out a mesh networking trial just off campus in a residential facility using hardware from Intel and software from Microsoft. This is a research project of theirs, but again, deploying it in our environment with real people to find out how it works in the real world. And one of the other somewhat less related connections, if you will, to industry, connections to Microsoft, we just this year announced the new Newcomb Institute for Computational Science, funded by Bill Newcomb of Microsoft. Very generous gift that will allow us to create a huge new initiative in computational science across the curriculum. And now, just to give you a little bit more background on residential life, I'm going to ask Dean of Residential Life, Marty Redmond, to come up and tell you about our residential community.
Thanks. Well, good morning. I think this is on. It sounds like I can hear myself. For those of you who've never been to the Hanover campus, again, as David suggested, we're an old institution. My responsibilities include both the operation of the facilities as well as the building, and most importantly for me is what really goes on in the student life area within the residence halls. What do the students do? How do we help them interact, communicate, learn from each other, all those kinds of issues. This is just a sampling of kind of the breadth of residence halls we have. The White Building, like many campuses, is a very small house. Houses about 19 students, very homey kind of a feel. Immediately next to it is a much more modern structure, similar to what we're building across from David's office, a much larger residential complex of about 340 students clustered in 4 buildings with appropriate amounts of common space so they can come together yet have their privacy at the same time. The bottom ones kind of are emblematic of a lot of our campus. We're an old institution. Most of my buildings, fortunately, aren't over 200 years old, but many were built in the 20s and 30s. And so as part of not only the building program that we're engaging in, we're also engaging in a major renovation effort of all the older facilities on campus, mostly infrastructure issues, making them more usable for today's student as opposed to the student of the 20s or 30s. A lot of privacy issues involved in that particular endeavor. Just to give you a sense of the campus, this is an overview of the entire campus. The main quad of the campus is here. This is called the Green. Baker Berry Library is at the heart of the campus. Residences typically perforate around the outside with the academics in the core. These 2 circles represent the locations where, in fact, we're building these 2 new clusters. David's office, for example, is right there, and we're building across the street on his parking spot in a parking lot. And then we're building another set of buildings over on that smaller circle to create, again, a larger residential community on that part of the campus. These are, at this point, pictures of models as well as artist renderings of the 2 sets of buildings we're doing. Hopefully this one we will start, which is the larger complex, within a month, assuming we can get finish the permitting process with the town. Again, it's 3 buildings connected. 340 beds across from the computer science area. This white element in the center is a community space where we could do lectures like this if we want. We could have a great dance. Generally multi-purpose places to bring the community of residents together. The other building is similar in design, a little smaller. Again, this would be the community center space, and it's also drawing, which this doesn't reflect, students right across the street in another residential complex into this. So again, we're trying to link communities together, and we think technology certainly as part of this project can help us to link those communities together. Again, the McLaughlin cluster, recently named, this is a depiction of typical floor plate. This whole center first floor is really community space. I've likened it to entering into a town. You come into Main Street of a town at its core, and then you branch out to the smaller neighborhood. So if you think of these buildings as having central entry points, you're coming into town, and then you break out, and the further into the building you go, the more private it becomes, and your neighborhoods get smaller. I think one of the interesting things for me to think about is how can I help the student on the 4th floor and the student on the 1st floor continue to learn from each other, to grow with each other, and stay connected. And is technology a way to do that, in addition to providing appropriate and user-friendly, usable to meet all their needs, kind of social spaces, study spaces, places where they can come together outside of their residence hall. I missed a slide, but one of the important pieces of the task here for me is, I think, we still call them dormitories rather than residence halls at Dartmouth. It's difficult to change people's language. Residence halls actually, professionally, in what I do, have a very different meaning. Dartmouth is an undergraduate liberal arts college. It made a choice 200 years ago to be a residential college as opposed to a community college, as opposed to a major research university where 10% of their residents may stay on campus. We truly believe as an institution that the educational endeavor is a 24/7 opportunity, and by being residential we can better engage students, faculty, and staff, and the entire community for that matter, in that particular process. Most of the faculty here don't teach at 3 a.m. in the morning. That's when I'm usually up dealing with an issue or two on occasion. But the concept is the same, that learning is what Dartmouth is about. And learning occurs when students want to learn. And it's not just in the classroom. It's the social interaction. We are obviously in a much more global community than we were certainly even when I was in college. All the different folks coming to a place like Dartmouth with 43 international students representing 43 different countries this year, just in the first-year class, a very diverse student population, faculty. We send students on many programs through the institution around the world for terms, which is our 10-week increment of academic learning at Dartmouth. How can we help them remain connected? Friendships, relationships. How do we help students navigate through those issues? So for us, it's the learning process. It's most of us probably in this room never shared a bedroom with someone other than a spouse or a significant other at this point. We're wanting our students to have that experience and to learn from it and to grow and develop just as human beings. How do they learn? How does a 15-year-old, and we have some, who come to the college campus, begin that maturation process up against 20, 21-year-olds or the 18-year-old? How do they help learn to be assertive without being aggressive? How do we help them learn those other kinds of skills that they generally learn from others? Also, how can we take the academic piece and make it work better for students? I kid about 3 a.m., but a lot of the email I get from students is actually at 3 a.m. in the morning. It's when they're finishing up their work and they're now thinking about either their plumbing's not working or they want some other kind of issue addressed. How can we provide them access through networks, through technology, through opportunities of taking space and technology and combine them in ways that we haven't figured out yet, which is part of what this program is about, that allow them to function in this living environment that can be then mobile and taken to the student center, where they might be wanting to have coffee and donuts and do some other different kinds of things. Or what can we bring into the residence halls to help encourage that? How do we give them access to all those tools and pieces of information? So that's my brief spiel. We'll certainly be around answering questions. We're really wanting to hear some feedback from you folks as we go about your thoughts about this. But it's, I think, a wonderful opportunity for us. So thank you for letting us be here. And Tom, you're up, I think.
So I know what you're thinking. What's an English professor doing working on a digital dorm project? I think I can answer that pretty quickly. I did 2 slides. Oh. Now you're really asking why. 1. I wear a lot of hats at Dartmouth. I started out as an English professor and still am. I got interested in very rapidly in the 80s and 90s, late 80s and 90s in applications of information technology for teaching in humanities and social sciences, particularly in humanities. This led me to do a first online edition of John Milton's Poetry and Prose. It's the only online edition of Milton's Poetry and Prose. It's a lovely, if I do say so myself, project that students help me with, both for research and also from the technical angle. It takes annotations and makes them into instruments, rather than instruments that make you feel stupid about what you haven't read. It takes you to the things it cites. So instead of telling you, gee, you ought to read the Odyssey, it brings up the Odyssey in a window at the point where it's most useful for understanding Milton. So this has been a great project, and it taught me that students can actually do serious, important research in the humanities and run it through, not just their coursework, but actually get it published. Web technology makes that available to them. More important, web technology has been able to bring research opportunities into classrooms. We couldn't do that before. Typical humanities research, literature searches, those kinds of things, they had to be learned one-on-one in a library or something like that. You couldn't model them in the classroom. You couldn't even bring those kinds of materials to the classroom. Well, now the reference room is in the classroom all the time. So we've redesigned classrooms at Dartmouth, lots of them. And the last big redesign project we did was the Berry Library, and redesigned again with the notion that it should enable collaboration around digital information. It should be a digital library. It should allow students to come together around these resources and to get access to them better. The next step, as I see it, is the dormitory, the residential hall. We now have an opportunity to start redesigning that with the information highway. So another hat that I've worn for the last 3 years is faculty associate in the East Wheelock Cluster. This is my living room. Students and faculty members gather there 2-3 times a week in a house that the college graciously allows me to live in, for the purpose of bringing faculty and students together in meaningful ways, typically in ways that break down the faculty-student relationship. I like to bring them into the house and put them on the same side of an event, rather than where they're usually on opposite sides of an event. So we'll have a Kronos Quartet play in our living room, followed by a buffet dinner. Tonight, I am missing the season opener of West Wing with students in our living room, but you know, it's much more fun being here. And then just recently, I've taken on a new responsibility because of my interest in technology and teaching. A new center is opened at Dartmouth called the Dartmouth Center for the Advancement of Learning. It's a teaching and learning center charged with the professional development of faculty members as teachers. And it's also, I think, one of the things I'm most interested in doing here is treating teaching as a research and publication thing as well. The more teachers are using web resources, internet resources for designing and redesigning their courses, the more they're actually putting their information about teaching out there. Teaching is coming out of the closet, as it were, and it's out there on the highway. The Open Courseware Initiative from MIT is a perfect example of this, where most of what goes on in classrooms at MIT is now published to the world. And I want to encourage that at Dartmouth as well. So from these perspectives, I've developed a few things about what I think students want. And the I think is a big qualifier there, because this is not coming directly from them. They do want, in their residence halls, the same kind of access to their study tools and information that they have everywhere else on campus. And right now, they have that access everywhere, except in the sunny days on the green when the screen can't be read. They also, though, want to mix, even if they're not mixing, they want to switch rapidly between their work materials and their entertainment materials and their socializing materials and all of that. This is a challenge to build spaces that enable that kind of rapid switching. So the digital dorm, if that's what we're going to call it for euphonious purposes, is not going to be just bringing a library model into the residence hall, nor is it going to be bringing a classroom model. That would be pretty deadly. But there's still classroom aspects and library aspects that students want access to all the time. And so we need to have places developed that make that switching. I avoid the term multitasking because I learned yesterday that people actually don't multitask. They switch real fast from one thing to the other. They want to do this in private, and they want to do it in groups. The current configurations of residence halls is real good on this. It's real kind of bad on this. And so we need to develop the group. The communication that students do is it's astonishing. It's so different from a routine communication in a home. They prefer asynchronous communication, again, so that they can switch around, what we sometimes call multitasking. They want to be able to communicate student to student within their location. They want to communicate student to student internationally, because so many of them are separated by international programs, learning abroad programs. They want to have different kinds of communication with the institution, because a lot of communication with the institution is communications with the institution's database and various information systems, and they want to be able to have that. What does that mean, you know, if you're doing your course selection and someone walks into the room? How can you? So thinking about setting up data projection systems and data access systems and living systems is what this team, this is a task that this team has set for itself. And that, I think, allows me to actually skip the next slide mostly, except to say what we think we're after now is working on a modified model for doing work, and work here is research, and it's reviewing classes, and it's working on a whole number of extracurricular things, the newspaper, Dartmouth television, from the residence, and still have it be a home at the same time. It's similar to the way a lot of businesses operate today, trying to build that kind of flexibility into things. The people at Cisco were telling us, in fact, they want graduates from places, they want to have students, they want to hire students from places where they've learned how to manage these kinds of flexible areas and manage their work and play and entertainment and socializing in that way. So we're interested in partnering with people that know more about this than we do, have the tools and have done some of the research. And we're also interested in setting up a live lab so we can produce research to push back the other way. Thank you. And Denise.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about actual user behavior that we've been studying at Dartmouth. I'm a sociologist, so I work with David, and I worked with some other folks in computer science to look at how people are using technology and what are some of the patterns and what are the implications of those patterns. I'm going to talk just about 3 studies that we've done. I'm actually going to start with the middle one, which was looking at user security behavior. And this was a survey of students at Dartmouth to find out what they think about security, how they behave, what kinds of behaviors that have implications for security. And 18 to 22-year-olds are typically a risky bunch. And that carries over into how they use technology. We found lots of risky behavior. For example, students share passwords pervasively. What I'm starting to find out now, and this is just anecdotally, is that carries over somewhat into the workplace after they graduate, and that has some problematic implications for employers. But they share passwords for a variety of reasons, some of them social, some of them pragmatic. They can't do certain things, and they share passwords to enable them to do certain activities. So that's a concern. We also found out that they don't understand basic security features of the Internet, despite e-commerce, online banking, lots of different kinds of behavior. They don't know what SSL is. They don't know what HTTPS is. They don't know what icons to look for, and yet they're engaging on all this behavior. I mean, some of you look, how can that be? It's true. They don't know what these things mean, and yet they engage in those behaviors all the time. So there are implications for the collective resources of the university, as well as implications for the individuals themselves. Then, sort of having that knowledge, we did a study of trusted computing, looking at actual behavior with browsers, when they believe they are secure and not, and how they evaluate the features in the browser that is supposed to indicate to them that it is a secure browser and they have a secure link. And we found out just sort of 2 quick things. Users are easily fooled by spoofed information, spoofed indicators, which is not surprising. There's lots of evidence of that out there. And we were actually testing in the Mozilla browser some different features, some asynchrony and random display with color and movement to try to indicate when there is a secure link. And they don't have to know what HTTPS is, and they don't have to know what SSL is. They don't have to know to look for those things. It was just a color, timing, synchrony that they were much better able to determine that that was secure versus some of the typical indicators that are used now. And then finally, this study this summer that David mentioned earlier, the pager study, where we had students carry pagers for 7 days, and we randomly paged them up to 10 times throughout the day and asked them to tell us what they were doing, what devices they were using, how they were online, where they were, who they were communicating with, and lots and lots of interesting data from that study. Wireless, not surprisingly, enables them to be very mobile. Mobile users were accessing up to 23 different access points throughout the week. And that was to be, they were more than 50 meters apart, those different access points. They're using in very interesting places. So they're not just using wireless in their homes and also in the library, two places we might really expect. They're using wireless in the dining halls. They're using wireless when they're at their friends. They're using wireless when they're outside. And so that enables lots more communication, lots more different activities online, different applications. And so we also found lots of communication. Dartmouth is a text-based communication environment. People prefer email. They use email, which Kevin doesn't want to take credit for, but you know, there's actually a verb at Dartmouth, which is to say, I'll blitz you that instead of I'll email you that. And that is the way people typically communicate. They use email almost like I am, and so over half of all the emails are 15 words or less. In that communication. They use email and IM to communicate with their local group, lots and lots of communication. They use telephone typically to communicate. They use telephones very little, which is unusual for an 18 to 22-year-old population. But when they do use the telephone, it's to communicate with people who are not local. And so some interesting implications for how they're using technology to maintain connections within the community. They will email faculty. They will never IM faculty, and they never call faculty, but they do a lot of email with faculty. So some of the connections between technology and device and type of application, as well as who the partner is that you're communicating with, or what is the activity you want to do, as well as location, where they are and what they're doing. So they are more likely to do email and online banking at home, not surprisingly, than they are when they're sitting on the green or at their friend's house. So the digital dorm gives us another opportunity to really start thinking about these kinds of issues, how they're using technology, when they're using it, and what they're doing with it, and then what are the implications of that for communication patterns, for different behavior, for the learning process. And so just a few of the types of questions that we're interested in exploring. You know, how does the social context affect the technology use, what they're using, what applications they're using? What are some of the social norms regarding the connection between the type of communication media and the content of communication? So when they are communicating with certain kinds of partners, what kind of device are they using? Where are they? How does that influence what is actually communicated? And then, so what are the implications of that for patterns of communication, for patterns of technology use, and for the social relationships among users? So within the local group, and maintaining ties between the local group and outsiders. Their friends who are overseas, their parents, their friends who are at other campuses, work partnerships, professors, etc. I think I'll hand this back to David now.
And Marty, that was very helpful to give you a little bit of more perspective on the way we're starting to think about this. You know, ultimately, our vision as it stands today anyway is to think of this as a huge opportunity for both enhancing the student residential experience. In some ways, that's the primary goal. And secondly, to create a test bed for students and faculty and industry researchers to better understand how the new devices, new applications, new services can fit into the residential life experience, and how does the space and the technology and the people interact in positive ways or negative ways. How can we learn about that? From our perspective as researchers, I'm a technologist. I develop technology often. And too often, I think, we in technology develop new ideas, solutions in search of a problem. Well, in this case, we can take that out and hopefully fit that solution to real problems, or at least find out whether it does help people solve those real problems. And in this particular project, we're hoping to engage industry in many different ways as partners and provide rapid feedback to those partners' knowledge about how students, people, really behave. The other thing we have to think about is that the target users, in some sense, are at least the class of 2010, which is kind of a scary number for me anyway, from a class of 80-something. But these are the students that will arrive in less than 2 years, the class of 2010. So it's not that far out there in some way. Also, we have to think in terms of a building that hopefully will last 100 years. And so we want to design technology into the building. We want to embed it into the building and yet remain extremely flexible because Lord knows, 100 years from now, technology is going to be quite different. So at this point, I'm going to just lay out a few high-level ideas for applications. I've got a bunch of more slides of possible application areas and also research areas that I think are interesting. We went to visit the Microsoft Home this morning, which is full of all kinds of exciting and interesting application areas that some of which may well fit into this dorm kind of construct. Certainly, an important area of applications includes learning and collaboration tools, things that fit directly into the educational mission of the college. But also things like communication are fundamental to what we and our students need to do. So are there ways that we can use space and use technology in that space to enhance the ability of students to work together, to interact with each other in person or across distance, and to interact with their information, again, 24/7. Entertainment, of course, we understand that our students do occasionally play games and watch TV. Probably not as much in some cases as some might think. But there are certainly opportunities for entertainment in these spaces as well. And understanding what kinds of entertainment students want to do alone in their private space and what they want to bring out to the public spaces is something that can fit into this project. And then finally, towards the bottom here, I have monitoring and automation. There's a whole range of interesting research, I think, in sensor networking, for example, that could explore technology in the space for a slightly different kind of application. It may, in fact, some of it may not involve the students at all. It may be entirely hidden, just helping the building management to understand energy usage, water usage, temperature variations, things like that. Although we have talked some about the possibility of connecting that to the students as well. These buildings are going to be designed with a fairly high standard for energy efficiency, but it might be interesting to see how we could provide real-time and yet subtle feedback to the students about their energy usage, water usage, and so forth. And whether that feedback, perhaps in the form of ambient displays or other subtle ways of informing them, could actually help save energy more because people are aware of their resource usage. Automation, of course, once you embed technology in the space, are there ways that you could make it easier to use that technology, remote control, and things like that. One of the things we've done so far is to go to a group of students and ask them what they want. And it's always a surprise what you're going to learn when you ask. One of the first things the students wanted was internet-enabled washing and drying machines. This is like a really critical feature of life in the dorm, is knowing when the washer's done so that you can go move it to the dryer before someone else moves it to the floor, right? Or finding a washer-dryer nearby that isn't already in use. And so we thought, oh, that's a cool idea. We can start, as technology people, thinking about how to do that, until I talked to Marty and realized they've already installed web-enabled washing and drying machines in the dorms. And you can just go to the website for the washer-dryer and see when it's available next. So sometimes technology moves faster than those of us who are in research. Another thing that the students thought would be interesting in a public space, in a lounge or something, would be to fill an entire wall with a video screen and a camera. And that would be like a mirror that you might see in a restaurant that provides a sense of more space, of more people in the room. But of course, in this case, it's a room all the way across campus, or for that matter, on another campus. So you get a sense of being in a lounge with people, interacting with those people, but they are in a different place. And today's display technology is probably not quite there to make that really feasible, especially in the rough and tumble student lounge. But it's an interesting idea that we could explore. So in terms of research, certainly there's an awful lot of technology research that I would like to explore that would fit into this kind of environment. I've been involved in wireless networking, and I would be interested in much finer-grained monitoring of the network to understand how the protocols are behaving and how the RF environment is affected by different traffic patterns and so forth. The sensor networking area is huge. Lots of my colleagues working on sensor networks for military applications or first responder applications and the like. But what can you do in a residential space that would be useful and unobtrusive? Pervasive computing, the kinds of things that we saw in the Microsoft Home are kind of fit into this category of embedding computing devices into the space and providing a very subtle connection between people and information. Location tracking and location sensing is a hot topic right now. It's, of course, also one that pushes a lot of people's buttons. You know, if you want to do location-aware applications, you need to know where the application or user is. How do you detect people's locations without forcing them to wear some contraption and also without invading their sense of privacy too much? Embedded devices is not something that I've done a lot of research on myself. But again, you know, when you're thinking about space and how you adjust and adapt that space to fit people's needs, what kinds of devices best fit into that environment? What kinds of creative new ways can you include displays or input devices that will enhance that experience? Entertainment, I mentioned. And security and privacy is one that's especially interesting to me. I think you heard each of the speakers mention that in one form or another. Marty mentioned students' increasing desire for a sense of privacy. And yet Denise pointed out that students really don't understand, at least in the IT world, when they are secure and when they are private and when they're not. And so developing the interfaces that allow people to understand when they're doing something risky, to understand the capability to adjust a sense of privacy if that's necessary, is a huge problem. And of course, Denise already talked some about sociology and behavioralistic research projects. At the very least, we can observe people in vivo. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but in the natural environment. Or we can also set up experiments. You know, we could take a room, a dorm room, and outfit it in some way like the Microsoft Home and have people stay there for a week and see how they interact with more fragile, newer technology. And I have a colleague who's interested in biometric authentication. Right now, to get into the dorms at Dartmouth, you have to have an RFID card. Your physical ID card has an RFID chip in it. You have to use that to get into the dorm. Students lose these things. You know, it's kind of a hassle sometimes. And so could we use other forms of biometric authentication instead? That might be a place where you could explore that. We certainly couldn't do it campus-wide initially. So we're out talking to industry. Like I said, this is kind of a brainstorming trip. We're starting to get organized within Dartmouth to pull together the right groups to start talking about how we could do this, how would we structure it. And we're starting to talk to companies like Microsoft Research, Cisco, Intel, etc., to see how and whether they would like to be engaged in this. I think that is very important for companies to be involved in some way or another. And the execution of this process over the next year or two is going to be critical to setting up the structure where that kind of thing can work out. So we are right at the point now where we are beginning to identify the initial set of objectives and milestones over the next 2 years before the dorm opens, and to try to set up some kind of a pilot project in an existing dorm next summer, and then eventually a growing set of other projects in the new dorms as well. And eventually, as Marty starts to plan for the 10-year out phase, we can actually start affecting the architecture as well based on what we've learned from the early pilots. So that's really about all that we had to say, and we kind of were looking forward to some feedback from you. If you have any thoughts or ideas, we've got lots of time here for questions and interaction. So any questions? I know. Yeah.
I was going to mention, you mentioned the idea of having a wall video screen in like a social area that would connect to another social area. There was a graduate student from MIT, actually, who was at MSR recently, came and gave a talk. They're doing exactly that. I don't know if you're familiar with that research.
They're doing it in the Media Lab?
I'm sorry?
They're doing it in the Media Lab? Is that where
No, they're doing it. I mean, they're doing it at MIT between two dorms.
Two
They
dorms?
actually have
Oh, okay, great.
two walls set up as video screens with cameras.
Oh, super. No, I hadn't heard about that. Yeah, we'll have to check that out.
Social areas that people can interact. But there were a lot of very interesting issues that came up with it. Like you couldn't actually. They found that actually having pictures of people, having actual video image, people were very uncomfortable with. So they ended up going to a much more like an outline sort of thing. People were a little bit more comfortable with that. But
So I apologize for anyone who's listening remotely, probably didn't get to hear that, but I'm not sure how well these microphones pick up the audience. Does it work pretty well? Okay, all right. Yeah, so that's great. We'll have to go check that out. This is just one idea of many that the students have come up with and we'd like to explore. Yeah.
We actually did it here in Microsoft Research with a bunch of the little kitchenette areas on the different floors. And actually, we were talking earlier this morning about privacy issues around this. There were a set of people in MSR who got very upset about this. And we ended up putting buttons outside the entrance to the room so that people who really, didn't feel comfortable being observed in the kitchenette all the time, every time they went to get something to drink, could, basically hit this button and turn the thing off for like 2 minutes.
Interesting.
Just sort of blanket. So,
I had sort of
people just found that to be important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did a lot of people turn it off? I mean,
I never saw the stats about how many people actually.
That's one thing I think is very important, and what I hope we will be able to do is not just to deploy the technology, and maybe you went beyond this as well, to really study it, to really monitor it. And you probably did some of that, and maybe MIT is as well. But that's critical, right? Because the question is, well, how many people did that, and why, and what was their thinking about it? Yeah.
They actually published a paper on it. I'll pick that up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, good. I'm not sure we would do this application. I just picked it as one of many.
Separate question.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that's super important about getting people to work or play together in public spaces is sort of shared storage spaces. What do you guys do around sort of individual network shares for people, and so they can get to their own stuff when they're away from their computer, or shared spaces that groups of people can get to?
Yeah, that's a good question. Shared storage has been something that Dartmouth has been talking about for quite a while. We did have, maybe still do have, a small amount of essentially FTP storage that people can use. And in practice, and the others can correct me, I think what people do is they blitz it to themselves. They email it to themselves. And since Blitzmail is a totally server-based email system, you can walk up to any computer on campus and get access to your email and therefore your files. Very crude, right? Extremely limited form of shared storage. Do you know, Tom, if there's any plan?
There's actually a lot of opportunities for shared storage around campus, but they're not rationalized into a system that any one person. You couldn't walk up to someone on campus and expect that they would know the full range of options. And so that's really where it's all there, but we haven't organized it. Faculty know a little bit more about shared storage. They're constantly being told to use a server here or use a server there. Whether they do or not is another matter. And then there's also, and Blitzmail will only save email and enclosures, and it will tell you relentlessly that you've got too much there, which is a really serious problem that we need to work on. And then there's also a large amount of web space available to anybody. So
That's true.
Faculty, staff. So if you're willing to store things that way, you can get a lot of space. So those
is it easy for people to set up, on a fairly impromptu basis, wikis or something like that?
It is. It's quite easy. Another avenue that faculty have is the Blackboard course management system, which is expanding to be more of a full faculty portal management system. And there's a new component that's in development now, which would be a depository of teaching tools, teaching information, online and PDF scan stuff, so that it's in components. You can build. You need to build a course. You're using a lot of the same components. You go to your box or shared boxes and pull the stuff out.
And another one is Online Reserve, which is now has a storage component. When it first started out, they would scan your reserve material, make it available to you and to your class online, and then it would all go away, and they'd scan it again. This was all fair use issues. That rapidly, we figured out that was stupid really fast. So now we do have a secure location for anything that's scanned by the library is all stored in a secure location, faculty access on an as-needed basis. So, but what we haven't done is sit down and say, here's all the ways you can store your information, and here are your choices, and here's the ones that work for you, student, here's the ones that work for you, reporter for the Daily Dartmouth, here's the ones that work for you, researcher, and that, we really should do that.
I was thinking just in terms of, coming back to a digital dorm, and a bunch of students, show up, a study group shows up, or just a random group of people show up, where they want to play a game or work on a project together, and they all walk in with their laptops, right? How do they actually move stuff around?
Yeah.
It's actually, in some ways they do that a lot already. They all meet up in the library and they can all get access to the same course material because that's already on the web. That's on the, and they use email for everything. And if they don't, and they carry them everything they need with them. They carry their laptops with them everywhere. And when they don't, they can at least access their email and communication from anywhere on campus. And their course materials and everything they get access to that way. So.
But an application that would be really wonderful, both in the dorm and in the classroom, is you have a bunch of people sitting around with their laptops, their BlackBerries, whatever device they happen to have. You ought to be able to grab that and throw it up right away, and it ought to be simple and really, a real grab and drag kind of thing. So there's like an icon somewhere on your desktop that is your display, whatever the display is for the day. And this would be great socially, and it would be really good in the classroom full of laptop users. You could have everybody doing a different research attack on a topic and then grab their stuff and show it to the class. And I haven't actually seen an interface like that yet. Maybe you guys have one.
I think that's something we've talked about in another context as well. Essentially, ad hoc, very dynamic workspace creation, use, and dissolution. You get a random bunch of students, and they just, a few seconds can share their stuff, and yet, securely, right? Have to do that in some way that an eavesdropper can't get in.
A completely different line of thought. The story about the washing machine struck me as being very interesting because, here's the classic case of, the number one thing students are asking for is already there and they don't know it.
Yeah.
Well, it was coming at the time they were talking about it. But
nevertheless,
there's a lot.
Which triggered another line of thought for me, because long time ago, back early in my career, I was, for an unfortunate period of time, in the position of running one of these dorms, and made me wonder what the potential. Well, all I can tell you is that running a dorm is a very different experience, and you see the world very differently than the student who lives there. More or less as the bellman sees the hotel differently than the guest, which made me wonder what possible advantages or what the people that run the dorms might see. Did you ask?
Well, Marty ultimately is the chief dorm master, if you will, on campus, and that's the main reason he's involved, is that we're interested in not only the impact on the people who have to run the dorms, but what benefits can we bring to the people who run the dorms.
Other than the trivial, the obvious but very important things like,
physical planning.
If it's possible to monitor the washing machines from your dorm room, presumably you have a vested interest in seeing that all the students know that, and there's some obvious difficulty in cutting through all of the background noise to get that very important piece of information.
Actually, as David said earlier, that was their number one request, and we're in the conversion process, so it's not fully up and running. And we didn't have to develop it. The guys who own the washing machine, that's what they're doing nationally, so it's actually a national marketing approach that they're taking.
I was just really thinking more about the problem we face around here a lot which is that we're all flooded with information every day, and we trash most of it because we simply don't have the time to wade through. If someone else isn't filtering for us, and the very important stuff doesn't float to the top, we don't have the time. And I assume students are in the same kind of position.
They are. I think part of it, I hate to use the word, but it's really a marketing approach. Those things that are important, defined by whom, is the big question, but those things that are important, how do we make sure that they get their attention? The laundry company, for example, in this instance, when every machine is on, free laundry, honestly, is a huge marketing piece to get them to use the technology. So that's the approach that we take. Instead of $1.25 a load, it's, for this week, it's free, guys. Have a blast. And then there's the instructional piece. We're converting it at the same time. And so it's important information. We're going to front-end loading, high energy efficient. We don't need to put in the full cup of laundry detergent. If you do, we're going to have soap all over the place. So it's also teaching people how to relearn how to use a laundry machine, in addition to just accessing what's open and is my laundry done.
All the things you get for college tuition.
Yeah, isn't it great? I think from our perspective, the fundamental issue is one, we're, again, fairly early in this process, but sitting down with students and trying to understand from them and hear what it is that they're interested in. And there's two levels. There's the basic services like the laundry issue, and then I think it's more the human element. Our students in particular, we think anyway, because of our 10-week term pattern and the course structure and whatnot, are constantly on the move and it's very rapid. They don't plan much more than 2 days in advance, quite honestly, and that's pretty far out. And
my high school junior years, planning it 1 day out, so I'm optimistic.
And where the disconnect becomes for many of them is their ability or inability to communicate, to connect, and to maintain relationship. Especially for some of our students, it's not unusual at our institution for in the junior year, the third year, for students not to see each other from the end of their second year to the beginning of their final year because of the way our pattern of study involves. So it's that connected piece, it's engaging us. One of my struggles constantly is students thinking in a day or two mentality, wanting me to show up for dinner tomorrow, which I'm happy to do, but I have 17 dinners tomorrow and I can't beat all of them. So if you really want me there, how do I help them to learn those things? Part of it's the connected piece, I think, is a huge piece for us. What we have not been able to do very well, that many of your organizations do much better, is bringing teams of people together, groups of people together around, in this instance, common workplace issues, but around research topics or just interest. I have a group that actually is one of Tom is not quite living in a building today, but right next door. It's a sustainability group, and we're probably got a group of students who really want to make a dent and a short and a long-term effort in engaging the institution very significantly in issues surrounding sustainability. So we created a little space in a residence hall for this nuclear group to get together, partly because when they're living together and sleeping together and sharing that intimate kind of a space, as opposed to being 5 separate buildings, it's the cooler conversation. It happens at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, how can we help them to expand their nuclear group to a larger group, and how can we engage with them in ways for them to communicate that 3 o'clock conversation with other people who have similar interests? How can we even find them? Not so much from a locator perspective, but are there ways we can use the technology that exists or can be created to help them identify others who share that similar interest, whether it's a buy-in on their part or it's an automatic push-out at the first instance, and then people get to make choices. And then the final one for me is the higher level learning. I think our faculty generically is moving much more into group project work and independent research work with students. And we just don't offer the space, certainly the facilities I have control over, for students to really grab a hold of technology, come together and use it. Right now it is, I have one smart classroom in a residence hall. It's really a classroom. It's not a place students really feel that comfortable in coming to do work. It's really classroom oriented. So how can we take some of the marvelous things, which are pretty basic here, but do I put a projector in the screen, and how do I give every student access to that in that building, and have some comfort level that it's easy for them to use and they don't have to be scared of using that. I was fascinated in the home this morning in the daughter's room. I think we saw where she had a portable projector. I think, boy, years ago I had a conversation with our CIO about why don't we just give students, everybody for part of their package, they get a printer, not uncommon in the marketplace. But we've gone to a green print, so we have community printers to cut down on paper, quite honestly, and cartridge and all that, which makes tons of sense. Are there ways that we could package, and would it make sense that as part of the laptop package we now offer students is almost the only option available. Can we get an inexpensive that just comes with it and goes? It's like your cell phone that goes with it. So for me, those are different levels. And I think the challenge here is to really try to understand what we can do in our sets of buildings that are really pretty static. We don't renovate very often. We don't have the luxury of that. And so the flexibility piece and things that can be done cost effectively and efficiently and constantly change without having to get into major infrastructure issues of buildings on the practical side is hugely significant for us.
One of the very practical things that I've heard you talk about on this trip with things like once the services are on the network, the student is working at 3 a.m. And I don't think the custodial staff are up at 3 a.m., but when something is going wrong, that the student can easily find out how to fill out that work order at that time is just a very practical thing. They're much more satisfied. And then no one else has to, I'm not working at 3 a.m., but they can ask me questions at 3 a.m. They can go look at notes and things. So that seems to be something at the very practical level that we can enable much better.
It really intrigued me the other day in a conversation with Cisco was the global piece. We have a marvelous off-campus study program around the world, but we do very little in Hanover to connect to that group, as well as just what's really going on out there in the world. How could we use all the technologies that we have that are coming to connect our students to this increasingly global environment, and what would that be? What would they want it to be? We have affinity programs, so we have language houses and cultural houses. And so when the Spanish program is over in Malaga, they really don't collectively communicate. And video reaches a point that we can do some really good real-time, fresh, wonderful opportunities for students who are getting ready to go to even see where they're going, because right now at best is a digital still image that they might be getting, but to engage in a conversation around the culture or the event and the language. We're just not doing those kinds of things. And not every student can afford to go to Spain. It doesn't fit with their curriculum, but they want that experience. So here's a way to give that whole experience to somebody else in a different way, not quite the same as being there. So I think there's wonderful opportunities, but I think we're just scratching the surface, at least certainly at my end of the world, in terms of what might they be and how is the residence hall the work environment. For students, it's probably a place they spend on a daily basis most of their time. A lot of it's asleep, but nonetheless, they spend a significant amount of time there. It's the one static environment, and it's their only piece of ownership of real estate on the campus. So how do we expand that into other avenues?
Well, I think one desired outcome of this ought to be, you think about people who run the dorms, one desired outcome ought to be, I think, passing some of the running of the dorms over, more of the running of the dorms over to the students, with increased information, increased feedback, some level of monitoring. Ought to go the power to make more and more of these decisions, the power to fill out a work order, and that's learning and good management all rolled together. And I think that would be certainly one of the things we ought to do. Then we can be more in the business of residential education and more in the business of working together as colleagues rather than who's running it, who's not.
Just a kind of silly question. I may have missed this at the beginning. What is the plan for common work areas or common workspaces in the new dorm? I'm always just surprised whenever I go to the UW, which is where I go most frequently, that the libraries are just packed. People don't seem to want to hold up in their dorm rooms to study. Every common area on the campus, the limited space in the student union, the libraries, seem just jammed at all hours, and there aren't enough seats for people. And I don't know the dormitories at the UW, but if they're like the ones I lived in many years ago, there isn't much in the way of common space.
Every time we build another unit, it has more common space.
I'm not sure if you can see the picture over here of the new dorm, but it includes a pretty large variety of common spaces, including study rooms explicitly for that purpose, as well as larger social spaces, kitchens, and living room type environments. Certainly a lot more than the older dorms have.
It's always a trade-off. You know, a bed is a certain number of dollars, a common space, $0. But once you get past that way of thinking, of course, building in these common spaces is important. Students at Dartmouth have been screaming about 24-hour study areas for years. The new library opened up one that's a cafe that's connected to the library, and it's fully equipped with and fully utilized. And then there are other spaces that have been determined, can be made secure overnight for 24-hour study spaces. But what does this mean? This means that they don't see any spaces suitably equipped in their dormitories to do that, or they don't want to do it there. And that's a question that we need to ask. Right?
I'm sort of curious about what, I'm not sure where each of you comes from in terms of technology and in terms of your Microsoft role, but I'd be interested in what kinds of questions you would love to have answered. You know, if you're developing technology, which I imagine many of you are, you probably have a lot of questions like I do. You know, I really wish I understood how the users would react to this idea or how they might use it. Are there things that you would suggest we look out for or try to arrange in the digital dorm context that would help you better develop your technology? Yeah. Sorry.
I just have a quick question, since what you talked about with the wireless, the ubiquitous wireless is very similar to Microsoft. Wireless is everywhere here in all the buildings. Basically, everybody has a laptop. And one of the results of that is, if you go into a meeting at Microsoft, basically you see a bunch of people sitting around a conference table and sometimes on the floor, and a whole bunch of laptops open in front of them, which is good and bad. One of the issues there is that people stop paying attention. And I was kind of curious if that was something that you had a problem with, because it seems like the classroom setting would bring that out even more acutely, particularly in smaller classes.
You know, the thing that strikes me really strongly, even though we've been doing this for 3 years now, I teach computer science students, right? Early adopters, techno geeks. And yet when I teach, almost nobody has a laptop open. And when they do, they seem to be taking notes, although you're never quite sure. I mean, you know, I'm not saying this is me. I'm just saying that's my experience. I know that others have demanded jamming devices in the classrooms or some other mechanism to make the wireless network unusable when the professor so deems.
There are some social norms around the use of the laptop in the classroom, actually. And so about 10% of the students say that they regularly take their laptops to class. And other students say the expectations are that for students who are taking notes, it's fine, but they don't want to see students on the web. They don't want to see other students on the web or on email too much in the classroom because it's distracting to everyone around them. Exactly like you're saying. It's distracting when we're in a meeting and 5 of the 10 people are doing their email and not fully engaged. The students actually say that, and there is to some extent some norms around that among them, not just among faculty.
There's a great example of how that became formalized. The Tuck School of Business has required laptops for several years, and in fact required wireless laptops in recent years. And the Student Association or whatever of the Tuck Business School eventually decided to ban laptop use in the classroom, except when it was explicitly needed for the class. And that's because there was too much day trading going on. And it was really distracting to the other students. That was their own decision. So you had a question or comment?
Yeah. The story about the digital dryers, washers and dryers, I found interesting because at my alma mater, a few years before those started to get sort of more mainstream, a group of students in one of the dormitories actually came up with digital washers and dryers and built the hardware themselves and installed it in the washers and dryers with probably a little less acknowledgement and understanding from the people running the dorms than they should have gotten. but nonetheless, it's fairly common for students to come up with these sort of things and work on little projects of this sort. How often does that happen at Dartmouth? And I ask partially because I don't know a lot about Dartmouth, and I don't know how heavily, how technical most of the students are. Whether, I mean, you won't expect, in most cases, the average English major to be working on a project of that sort.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. You know, I certainly, if you look back through the Dartmouth history of the last 50 years or so, BASIC was written in large part by students. I think it might have been, you know, inspired and certainly supervised by John Kemeny. Blitzmail, as we've heard, was written in part by Kevin when he was a student. Dartmouth time-sharing, we used to, when we had one computer on campus, back when it was, you know, the size of this room, the Dartmouth had its own homegrown operating system, Dartmouth time-sharing system, and it was all written by students, supervised by some staff. And it lasted about 30 years in operation through the time Kevin and I were there. And so there's a long history of student innovation. And in fact, Dartmouth decided, for whatever reason, not to make a web-based version of its email client. So the students did. They formed a group called the Basement because they were hacking in the basement. And they built a web-based email client that's extremely popular. And in fact, Denise was using it today in the hotel. And so that kind of atmosphere is definitely there. We're not a technical school, you know, we're not at MIT, but there are a lot of students who are maybe not computer science majors, but still tech savvy in one way or another, and I think would love an opportunity, especially if we can provide a little structure around it, some advising, some funding, etc., to let them run with their ideas. I mean, part of this is build it and they will come, right? You know, you build the infrastructure, you set out the theme, you set up a little bit of infrastructure to make it possible for them to get the advice or hardware, what have you, and they'll do great stuff. I mean, they come up with most of the good ideas.
I actually was advised by computer professionals to migrate all that online Milton edition from HTML to XHTML and eventually to XML. But they didn't have the time to help me do it, so I just found a couple of students to help me design the project of migrating to XHTML. And I did, unfortunately, an awful lot of the stroking, but I learned it from a student, and I found that actually an important resource. We are under-resourced in curricular computing, badly under-resourced. But students, they'll do it for free. Yeah. They'll do it for a pat.
Well, I mean, that to me is another opportunity that we have with this project, is not just to, you know, enhance the learning environment, not just to provide more research opportunities for faculty, but huge project opportunities and research opportunities and curricular opportunities for students. You know, I teach computer science students, and we're always looking for interesting projects that they can do in the course of a 10-week term. And if you give them something like this they could live with, you know, they will just love that.
Kevin, that actually raises a really good point, and it's something we see here at Microsoft as well, is that people will never use the systems exactly the way you expect.
Right. Yeah.
There's some things they will use, some things they won't use, and there'll be a whole other set of, you know, behaviors and coping mechanisms they create for themselves just to deal with this. And sometimes they'll just go off and build tools.
Yeah. Whole workaround.
Yeah, like, you know, a great example, you know, here at Microsoft is, you know, we use, you know, Outlook and Outlook calendaring for scheduling meetings all the time, and, you know, most of the conference rooms on campus are in there. But it's really hard to actually find out what conference room, you know, you could possibly book without, you know, adding a whole bunch of them to your meeting requests and then seeing which ones are actually available and then pulling a whole bunch out. Somebody wrote a web-based tool that just, you know, you give it a building, and it'll show you all the conference rooms that are available. And it was a simple thing because a whole bunch of the data was just available. Yeah. But somebody sat down and actually wrote the tool on top of that. Mm-hmm. So you should be thinking about, you know, you need to be able to respect people's privacy, but, you know, make sure that the way to sort of programming these things is open and well known.
Yeah.
So that people can actually just go build their own stuff, and some set of them will.
Yeah.
The other side of that coin, though, is you kind of have to ask them what they want, because a lot of the reason people don't use Microsoft software the way it's meant to be is because it was built without asking what they wanted.
Well,
this is some of the security issues, of course, right? So when we started asking them, they're sharing their passwords all the time. Why are they doing this? What? Well, you find out things like sometimes they need to be in a certain location, and all they need to do is check in, and and they don't actually need to be there to do anything. So they get their friends to do it, and so there are institutional interests in that, because maybe we do need them to be there to check in, and so we want to, we don't want them to do that work around. But other times, staff who do job sharing were sharing passwords because they needed access to each other's files. Well, we should be able to come up with a secure way that they can each. So this is the collective storage and those kind of things that they just weren't doing. The easiest way for them to do it was to share their passwords. So understanding that that's the reason gives you what kind of tools you should be looking for.
It's a pretty big deal at Dartmouth. Your password is used for almost everything, the same password. So sharing that is a big deal. You could drop a course for your friend if you have their password.
You also they use the same password everywhere they go, so that's not just on campus.
At the risk of sounding really paternalistic, I'm going to make an observation here that finding out what people want is rarely as simple as asking them what they want. And I know this about me all the time. I don't know that I got the wrong tool till I've tried it, and I don't know what the right tool looks like till if someone's given me a wrong tool. It's like if you've got a ratchet set. How many of those are you going to try before you got the right size? Inevitably, you're going to try several. I don't even know that there is a tool that will do something until someone's given me an awkward one. So it's tricky. Just asking is never sufficient. So, but you knew that.
We could have another hour conversation about that. It's just that. So.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering, coming back to this idea about study space and workspace and the fact that students don't want to do their work in their dorm room. And I'm wondering if there are implications that kind of go both ways between students in a dorm and people who work out of their home, which I do. So that sort of made me think about the fact that, I absolutely avoid taking the computer into the bedroom. Because I need the separation from work, and maybe part of that is how students are sort of separating different aspects of their life that maybe, in the past they weren't as conscious of.
I think one of the things we don't know enough about is the comment that students don't want to work in their room is a gross generalization.
Right.
Just like
clearly.
How your preference store might be working out of your home. So I think one of the things we don't know enough about is really what are students' interests, desires, and real patterns currently, and how might space, as one option in different locations, play into how they might then choose to change their behavior. How might then whatever technology is available in those different spaces, how might that also change their behavior, and how might they weave together? I think for me that, as the residence halls go, that's for me the most fascinating part. We know students want privacy, so that sort of suggests everybody wants a single. Well, that's not true either. They do and they don't. The buildings that we have a lot of singles in are popular, especially if you're taking organic chemistry in your junior year. That's who lives there. They're very antisocial. They've got gobs of work to do. And then as soon as that term is over, they now want some other residential experience because they want to be more social again. We see that pattern. And so how all this kind of relates to the research end, both in terms of the technology, but also human behavior, this particular age group's behavior. We're very traditional 18 to 22-year-old undergraduate population, which is very different than a community college. You might have 45, 50-year-olds also engaged in the same academic endeavor.
On the other hand, it's a very diverse student body in terms of their ethnic and international orientation. I mean, they come from very many places. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things, I'm Dartmouth 96, and one of the things I found lacking to some extent when I was in school was good teamwork spaces. So we have a lot of classes where you just study on your own, but then especially in computer science and engineering, you're a lot of team projects. and there was like one room in Sudikoff where we would try to find, and there's just not many places. Like libraries aren't a good place, and you can't go into a common room and do that either.
What kind of space would have worked for your needs?
Well, that one we found was a little room with a whiteboard.
Yeah.
And
006. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Is that something? And the same sort of. I was thinking about the sort of other projects and web workspaces maybe where you need a common place to collaborate and do something.
Yeah.
Is that things that you're actually working? I mean, is that something that you find as a need?
We hear that a lot. Yeah. And you need both the virtual and the physical spaces, and I think this is, in my mind, one of the first times we've really started to formally think about that process. Certainly in Sudikoff we've thought about that from time to time. It's hard to create a lot of those spaces. I know in Baker Berry, when they designed the library, 7
student operated rooms like that.
Yeah, they specifically said we're going to set up these reservable group workspaces, because the library of the 21st century, roughly speaking, is not a place to store books. It's a place where people come together to interact with each other and with information. And some of that's non-technical, right? You need a space, you need a table, chairs, and some of that's increasingly technical, right? You need a projector, maybe. You need, some mechanism to detect everybody's presence and build a shared workspace on the fly, or what have you. It sounds like in your case what you needed was a whiteboard and a quiet place where your group could be by itself.
Right.
Yeah. Increasing today, that would include laptops. Not in '96, but now it would. Yeah.
Just to put that in perspective, because you're familiar with the campus, Mass Row, one of our older sets of residence halls, 313 gross square feet per student. That's the building box. That's basement, attic space, the entire envelope. These buildings we're looking at about 420. The difference isn't in the bathroom allocation and bedroom allocation space. It's really in the common space. So we're adding approximately 100 square feet per student resident of common space in different forms, and trying to see which one hopefully they will all be used well. Students have helped inform us in those decisions as to size, shape, where, how, when, but still not sure because we haven't built them yet as to exactly what impact they'll have. My guess is, from what I'm hearing from students, is they'll still want. That seems to be a growing need. So they want the privacy of the bedroom experience, if you will, which is also their kitchen and dining room and entertainment center, and also varying group size issues. So I'm anxious to see how that plays out as we get these buildings up and running. But it's about a 100 square foot difference, which on a cost basis, quite honestly, a bed costs $120,000 each. So this is $66 million for 500 bed space.
Kevin?
The question of sort of number of square feet per student is really interesting, because in our Windows Media Center group, one of the target audiences they look at is students and people living in small apartments. Particularly in other parts of the world, people live in very small, constrained spaces. Are you guys seeing any trends in terms of students, rather than having like a computer and a stereo and a TV and all this stuff, bringing less equipment? And how is that sort of affecting the way you think about sort of digital content and how you wire and wire these spaces?
I don't have a lot of direct experience with that. I know that certainly there was a huge ramp up in the amount of stuff people brought, and it's coming down a little bit with the convergence of devices. Dartmouth is trying to get rid of the cable TV network eventually and do that video over IP, which may mean that you can eliminate the TV set, right? Essentially the kind of thing you're talking about. The telephone itself might go away and be replaced by the laptop or a portable telephone, for example.
Which it has.
The stereo component systems are gone. They get left in my basement, actually.
You have quite collection.
I get TVs too, but they're not mine. But stereo component systems it's just gone. And that used to be more important than a chair when I was in college. So, except in the cases where people have a vinyl devotion or fixation, that's gone. And so it's all converged around their computer, a cute set of speakers, but also shared music. They're legally sharing music now through iTunes.
We don't have any illegal sharing on our campus.
Yeah, we have
none.
So that's an interesting question. I mean, if the stereos are going away, right, mean, are people literally using, their computers as a stereo where they can blast music that bugs their neighbors?
And their iPod.
And their iPod, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's part of the question. Are they going sort of more personal? Everybody's got their own iPod or MP3 player? Or are people really using their computers as stereos?
They're using their computers because you can get everybody that agrees to share their iTunes file, is there. When I live next to the dorm, and so when I open up my iTunes, I've got a choice of about 60 on our subnet. There's 60 different people sharing their music. I can plug that into my speakers and play their music until they close their computer down. And students do a lot of that. Now, if they were going to have a dance, this would be great. This would be terrific. You could, one laptop unit plugged into a good speaker system, you could access everybody's music, and everybody could be part of the DJ, experience there. And I think that would be really exciting. That's what's happening.
In the study,
you can't do that with an iPod. You can't share across iPods. They were designed not to share. Right.
But one of the things they said about listening, sharing music would be, so the speakers, they often, there's a lot of quality issues, right, with the speakers still, that because they're not portable, they're not small, and they don't have big, good speakers in their room, so that's an issue. But to the extent that can be wireless, that I can just show up in your room with my music and we can listen, or we can that walking into a space and being able to play your music, you could just plug it in, there's that, but I think that's the kind of thing that could really go to wireless too. That's what they talk about. Yeah, it would be great if I could just walk in and play my music here.
That's really simple.
Or for that matter, a lot of them have iPods, right? And they listen, walking around campus and their earbuds in. And a lot of them have said, why can't I just be streaming? And we got this wireless campus, right, with 60 music collections in your subnet alone. I should be just able to listen to those as I walk around.
And there's no reason whatsoever why iTunes can't handle also streamed lectures. Mm-hmm. It does handle streamed lectures very well, actually. People aren't using it that way, but it can. No. And streamed music collection from the library. So we've got a friend, Steve Sway, in the music department. He teaches a course on opera. And you know how deadly it is to go down to the music library and put on the headphones. Maybe you got a splitter and you can watch with one other person, listen with one other person. But there's only 3 discs. Well, that's all over now. A few hours work, and all of that material is up. It's on his Blackboard site. It's coordinated with Scan Libretti. So you can listen in groups, you can listen individually, you can do it anywhere you want, anytime you want.
So you can be bored anywhere.
Yes, you can open it anywhere. But one of the features that's particularly is it shows a management system the students are already very familiar with. They already know how shared music works. So if you can plug course materials into a system that's already familiar to them, it's like plugging in things onto chat systems. Everybody knows how chat systems work. If you want to put more communication potential, put it on a chat system because they know how to operate that, and it's familiar to them. So this is one of the things.
The music sharing is an interesting model for that. I guess that means if you declare sharing curriculum materials illegal, sooner, overnight, everybody will be reading.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Cluster.
We should probably wrap up.
Yeah.
Go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for all your feedback. Very helpful.
Very interesting.
Great.